Okay, let's just jump right in. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're tackling this absolutely fascinating dual challenge. On one hand, we're going to figure out how to master what a lot of people call the language of business, the super structured, rule-heavy world of financial accounting. And on the other hand, we're going to unlock the actual cognitive science behind how our brains learn, and more importantly, retain all this incredibly dense information. I mean, if you've ever found yourself just staring blankly at a textbook, feeling like you totally get the words right then and there, but knowing deep down you'll forget literally all of it by tomorrow, well, this explainer is exactly what you need.
So, right off the bat, we have to ask ourselves, why is this language of business so incredibly hard for our brains to learn? Well, the main culprit is a system called double entry bookkeeping, and it is notoriously difficult, mostly because its core rules feel entirely counterintuitive to how we actually experience the world every day. Think about it. As humans, we're wired to think in simple additions and subtractions, but the language of business, it demands that we think in dualities. It insists that every single action has an equal, opposite, and honestly, sometimes highly abstract reaction.
So let's get into Section 1, the language of business. So what actually is this financial language, and why on earth has it formed the absolute backbone of global finance and error detection for literally centuries? Well, double-entry bookkeeping is basically a method where every single financial transaction is recorded with equal and opposite entries. We call these debits and credits. The entire point of this dual-entry system is to balance the books, maintain just pristine accuracy in financial records, and make it super easy to immediately spot errors or, fraud. In the accounting equation, every time an asset increases, something else has to shift. Either another asset must decrease, or a liability or equity account has to increase to perfectly match it. It's like a giant seesaw that always has to stay perfectly level. Now, here's where the complexity really starts to compound. To record these transactions, we actually have to memorize specific rules tied to three very distinct types of accounts. First, we have personal accounts, which relate to actual people or artificial persons like companies. Then we have real accounts, and these relate to business assets and properties. And finally, nominal accounts, which are the ones that handle business expenses, incomes, profits, or losses. And the kicker? Each of these three categories operates under its own specific, unique set of rules for exactly what gets debited and what gets credited. It is a lot to juggle. Moving right along to Section 2, Debits and Credits Explained. If you want to speak the language of business, you've got to master its vocabulary, right? So let's look at the specific mechanics of debits and credits, because this is exactly where most passive learners just get hopelessly tripped up. A debit is an entry on the left side of an account, and it increases the value of assets and expense accounts. A credit, over on the right side, increases the value of liability, equity, and revenue accounts. But okay, here is the wildly counterintuitive reality that confuses almost everyone. Think about your personal bank account. When you deposit money, your bank statement says your account was credited. So naturally, we grow up thinking a credit means an increase in cash. But in accounting, a deposit is a credit to the bank's liability account, because technically, they owe you that money. On the bank's internal books, they actually record a debit to their own cash asset account. This massive perspective shift is exactly what makes this whole subject so conceptually heavy. To cope with this mental gymnastics, accountants historically had to get pretty creative. Check out this quote from a 17th century text called The Merchant's Mirror by Richard Daphorn. He wrote, "Cash representeth to me a man, to whom I have put my money into his keeping, the which by reason is obliged to render it back." Think about that for a second. To make sense of these highly abstract rules, Daphorn literally had to personify an inanimate object like cash. He imagined it as an actual person who owed him something. It really just goes to show you that the human brain has always had to build these weird, creative, conceptual bridges just to master abstract ledgers. And here's what all of those rules actually look like in practice. What you're seeing is a general ledger and journal entries. Before transactions even go into T accounts, they are recorded chronologically in a journal, which is often called the Book of Original Entry. Notice how the debits on the left and the credits on the right must always perfectly equal out. Think of it like a tenant and a landlord. The tenant writes a rent check, entering a credit to their bank account and a debit to their rent expense. The landlord, they do the exact opposite, a credit to rent income and a debit to their bank account. Every single action has an equal balancing reaction. The whole shebang has to tie out.
Which brings us to Section 3, the passive study trap.
Now, obviously, understanding those rules in the moment is one thing, but actually retaining them for a high-stakes final exam is an entirely different beast. I want you to take a second and just reflect on your own struggles with retaining dense information. Why is it that we can read a whole chapter on journal entries, perfectly highlight the definitions of nominal and real accounts, feel incredibly productive, and then completely draw a blank 2 days later? Why does our memory completely fail us right when we actually need it?
Well, the answer lies in what cognitive scientists call the illusion of competence. When we passively reread our notes or engage in massed practice, which, by the way, is just a fancy scientific term for cramming, our performance actually does improve pretty quickly in that single study session. But it's a trap. It tricks our brains into a false sense of fluency. We genuinely believe we've learned the material well, but that learning is entirely fleeting. The knowledge disappears rapidly, leaving us just staring at a blank exam paper in total panic.
All right, let's fix that. Section 4, 3 active recall methods. So, how do we actually fix this? We have to introduce active recall. This is the scientifically backed antidote that top students use to forcefully build stronger neural connections. The first of 3 really powerful methods we're going to look at is the blurting method, which is also known as the blank page technique. It is incredibly simple, but I warn you, it is absolutely brutal. Here's how it works. You study a topic, like those tricky rules for debiting and crediting a personal account, for about 20 to 40 minutes. Then, you just close the book, take a totally blank sheet of paper, and write down literally everything you can remember. No peeking. Finally, open your notes back up and check what you missed, marking your mistakes in red pen. It instantly, and I mean instantly, strips away that illusion of competence and reveals the actual, undeniable gaps in your knowledge. Method number 2 is the legendary Feynman technique. The goal here is to teach the concept you're learning to an imaginary 5-year-old. You have to use plain, everyday language and absolutely avoid all jargon. For example, instead of reciting some massively complex biological definition of photosynthesis, you'd explain it by just saying, plants are like solar-powered kitchens. Honestly, this is exactly what our 17th century friend Richard Daforn did when he personified cash to understand accounting. When you forcefully strip away the jargon and create simple analogies, it guarantees true conceptual clarity. Try recording yourself doing this on your phone sometime. You will immediately hear where you stumble, and it highlights your weak spots for sure. And the third method is spaced repetition, heavily combined with active recall. This is often executed using apps like Anki or SuperMemo. Instead of passive highlighting, you create question and answer flashcards. And the magic here is the underlying algorithm. These apps test your memory of those complex accounting rules at increasing intervals, perfectly scheduling the review for the exact optimal moment just before you are about to forget them. Now, it does require daily consistency, just 20 to 30 minutes a day, but it absolutely destroys the competition by locking that knowledge into your long-term memory permanently. Let's pull this all together in Section 5, Mastering Complex Subjects. Let's bring all of this together into a highly effective daily flow used by top learners. Check this out. In the morning, you tackle your new, deep concepts using the Feynman technique. This ensures you actually understand the underlying mechanics, like really grasping why a bank deposit is a liability for the bank. Then, in the evening, you consolidate your weak areas by using the blurting method on whatever it was you studied yesterday. And finally, at night, you lock it all in for the long haul by doing your Anki spaced repetition reviews. It's a complete system, learning, consolidating, and retaining, all in one seamless, powerful loop. Now, I want to leave you with a really crucial reminder to take away from this explainer. You have to embrace the discomfort. Active recall feels so much harder in the moment than just passively reading a textbook. You will struggle to retrieve the information, and honestly, you will probably feel frustrated. But that mental struggle, that is the entire point. That friction is the literal sensation of your brain building stronger neural pathways. The students who embrace this discomfort rather than running from it are the ones who ultimately dominate their subjects. So as we wrap up today, I want to leave you with this final thought. Which active recall method are you going to use to master your next abstract challenge? Whether you're tackling the language of business, trying to learn a foreign language, or diving into complex science, pick just one of these methods today. Push right past that illusion of competence and start dominating your learning goals. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and happy learning.